it was nice to get that feedback. And I think that's one of the things that having students from all kinds of different backgrounds really adds to my life, because I myself, I'm not boasting. You'll get the full context of this. I was a really good student. Like, I did very well in all my school subjects. And the thing that taught me was that I had worth and I had value if I was, the teacher's pet and I knew all the answers. And of course, that's such a terrible way to go about life. And just thinking back to that incident that I was mentioning, when someone who, is very, very happy to speak their mind, basically just up and said, look, you need to slow down. You're not explaining this right. And part of me was very defensive, but I got feedback from someone who's not traditionally academically inclined, and I survived. And I learned that I can, you know, I can do a really terrible job with someone for a couple of minutes, and I can go back and improve and be better.
So one of the questions I guess I wanted to ask you was, firstly, I guess that when you teach, your students are quite diverse in terms of their ages and backgrounds.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure if it's different. Well, I think it probably is different at different universities. But towards the end of last year, I did have a real privilege to sort of teach the first year chemistry batch at my university. And there's always something a bit special about first years, because you're coming in, everyone has to do the first year chemistry course, right? Whether you're going on into engineering, or you're wanting to be a doctor, or even you didn't quite know what you wanted to do and you did high school chemistry and you thought, hey, I'm going to do first year chemistry in university. And it's really special having a wide mix of people, because it does mean that I get really interesting and lovely questions. And look, people sometimes think it's a cliche when lecturers like myself say there are no stupid questions, but there really are no stupid questions. Most of the time, I've had a privilege of having students who are really engaged and really thinking hard about what I'm teaching. And then, because they come at a question from a slightly different angle, or they are just sort of connecting things to their own experience that I've not had before, because everyone's had their own experience, we get these really, really interesting questions that come up in the course of lectures. And we could talk more about that, or
Yeah. I would imagine, if I was in your shoes, the questions for me mean that they are engaged. I'd be concerned if they weren't asking questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I get a little bit nervous when the class is quiet. So sometimes, especially if some students are not as used to putting their hands up in class, one of my little personal favorite things to do is to have a little online input form, so students can actually just sort of type in things that they feel a little bit embarrassed to put their hands up. Not everybody's the person who'll put their hands up in class and say, but what about this, but what about that, so I really love getting those little nuggets of input that way. Yeah.
Oh, I love that you use that input form. That's such a great idea. So does that happen during the lecture?
Yeah, so that happens during the lecture. It does. What I do is, when I've got my slides up, my computer's going anyway, so it's not too difficult for me, at least, to take a peek and see if there's been any questions that come in online. But sometimes, when I've also had students who are at the other extreme, where thankfully they still have a bit of fire left in them, because they haven't had it pushed out of them by school, and they come in and they're very, very happy to tell me straight out, you're not doing a good job explaining this. that was an interesting experience too. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I, it must feel strange at the time when someone says that to you, but then I guess when you look back, you think, well, actually, it's helped me improve, because it's nice to get feedback. I know it's hard to take, but I guess it helps you think about how you're going to improve that after.
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice to get that feedback. And I think that's one of the things that having students from all kinds of different backgrounds really adds to my life, because I myself, I'm not boasting. You'll get the full context of this. I was a really good student. Like, I did very well in all my school subjects. And the thing that taught me was that I had worth and I had value if I was, the teacher's pet and I knew all the answers. And of course, that's such a terrible way to go about life. And just thinking back to that incident that I was mentioning, when someone who, is very, very happy to speak their mind, basically just up and said, "Look, you need to slow down. You're not explaining this right." And part of me was very defensive, but I got feedback from someone who's not traditionally academically inclined, and I survived, and I learned that I can, you know, I can do a really terrible job with someone for a couple of minutes, and I can go back and improve and be better. And that was such a big learning experience for me myself that I was really glad to have from a student who came from outside the usual norms. Yeah.
Yeah, I I respect that so much. I mean, I wasn't that great at school. I wouldn't say it was because I wasn't clever. It was because I had other stuff going on that affected it. But when I went back to university later in life, I was very much like you've just described, where I thought, right now I've got to be the top and I've got to stay at the top because that's all that matters. And you very quickly realize that once you've left that environment, those are not the things that are going to carry you through. And we can't be good at everything. There's always something to improve. So it's
Mm-hmm.
nice to hear that, you teach your students and your students teach you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think just to have my students be satisfied that they've learned enough from my class, that they don't feel like, well, not, some of them are perfectionists. Others of them will be happy to sort of get the broad strokes, and they don't feel like they have to dot every T, dot every I, and cross every T, and they're perfectly okay with that, and that's really lovely, because again, out in the real world, right, outside academia, right, you just have to get the job done, right? And in academia, it kind of matters whether you get, whatever letter grade system you've got there. In Australia, it's like, I think there's a high distinction, and then there's distinction, and there's a credit. It doesn't really work like that in the real world, and that's really refreshing when my students bring that into my class. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have a very mixed class, let's say, and you've got students that are older, you've got some that have come straight from college, how does your teaching approach differ? How do you adapt?
Yeah, well, I think so. The first thing that I've learned, which has also been really hard, is to be really prepared to not go into extra detail. The way that I think about my lectures, and the way that I think about my material is, there's always a little bit of the mid credit material, right? Or post credits material, right? If everyone goes through a lecture very happily, I'll say, right, we've got an extra 5 minutes. We can go through this, right? So, for example, towards the end of my set of classes, we had a bit more time. And I thought, hey, I'm just going to talk about the Nobel Prizes this year in chemistry and how that relates to what people are interested in, right? And so that was the kind of thing that's like, yep, if I've got time, I can put that in. If I'm going slower because we needed to go over some material again, then I can leave that out. So just having little bits of material that I can jettison at the end is really useful. And then the other thing I found is to really work on having systematic and clear instructions, and really systematic and clear sort of procedures for going through things. I suppose it might be different in different fields, but in chemistry, for myself at least, I find that there's always more to learn. And the more I try and clarify the way that I teach things, and the more I try and clarify what I present, I find that even students who know the material very well, hopefully will have one or two things that they can pick up on, and just really, have gain from. And then the other thing, which is an institutional thing, and I can't really take credit for this, but at my institution we've got things like, for example, peer mentoring systems, and I'm sure other universities have something similar as well, where part of the work gets done outside the lecture or outside the class, and that's where, in a sense, my job as a lecturer isn't really to present everything in full detail in the lecture. My job as a lecturer, in the lecture at least, my most important job is to give you an outline of what you have to know, and then I'll fill in the main details, and then I'll fill in the details after that. And there's going to be some point at which, whether you are more academically inclined or less academically inclined, there is a point at which you have to go on and sort of work at it yourself. And the last thing that I like to do is to just have my emails open. So if my students send me a quick question, I can send them a quick answer back. And if I notice that quite a few people in class are asking a very similar question, then I can just sort of put that in to the class discussion board. Yeah.
I mean, you sound like a very open and accessible lecturer. I don't think it's always like that from my experience. I mean, I really love that you're doing that. You know,
Thank you.
I think it's
Yeah.
such an exceptional trait to have as an educator because. But do you know what? I mean, this is totally kind of off topic, but I want to know.
Oh,
So, where
no
do you
worries.
draw the line? Because you must be inundated with students contacting you.
Well, interestingly, my students have been a bit shy. If anything, I've often wished that they would contact me sooner, because look, if they ask me for help, right at the start of a question, I can often just dash off a quick email that says, "Look, try this formula, try that formula, see what you get." Right, and then
Mm,
if they email me back, I can email them back. And look, I've got kids, right, and I can't be at my computer all the time preparing notes or doing research or whatever, but I can just sort of be on my phone sending off a quick email while I'm with the kids. I feel like I shouldn't have said that, but that's what all of us do, right? So that actually fits in really well. What I'm really scared of is when a student has spent like 10 or 20 hours going down the wrong rabbit. Well, 10 or 20 is probably an overstatement, right? But they've done the entire question, going down the wrong rabbit hole, and then they email me and say, "Look, I don't think this answer is quite right." That's what really scares me. So, I mean, I think it's almost easier if they it's easier if they come to me right at the start rather than in the middle or at the end, or worse still, if they don't ask me a question at all and they show up in the final exam not quite knowing hit from tail. That's when things are really messy, because first off, just on principle, we've kind of failed each other, me and my student. And secondly, they're gonna have to come back and retake my class again. So, that's more work for them. That's more work for me. Honestly, just come in the first time. Well, like you said, I suppose not every lecturer is like that, but I would rather have a student who doesn't know just come and ask first. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah, I can see what you mean there. And interestingly, I guess now I wonder, do you notice any differences between the kind of mature students and other students in how their communication skills are?
Oh, that is such an interesting question. I didn't have that many questions like that. So in my second year course that I taught last year, it was a bit more technical, but most of those students were sort of in the more typical university student category. My first year class was the one where I had quite a wider range. And yes, I think one main difference actually is that the mature students were just a bit more willing to network. I felt like I think, and to be fair, like when you're in first year in university, you're getting used to everything. Everything's new, everything's fresh. You're finding like the best places on campus, so you're finding your way around or whatever it is, right? And when you come back, or when you're coming in as a mature age students, I found that the students who came up to me after the lecture with interesting questions, or just wanting to chat, or wanting to know what I did, or wanting to tell me about what they did. They were all either students who were mature age, or interestingly, some students were like doing dual major programs, or taking first year chemistry in their second or third year for some reason, curiosity or whatever it was. But they were the ones that, I mean, I love all my students, right? but it was really lovely chatting to them in particular, and just sort of getting to know them. Yeah, yeah. And I think that was one difference that I noticed. Yeah.
Do you notice any challenges? And I guess from both perspectives, like challenges for you teaching more mature students, or challenges that you see from them in being a mature student.
Hmm. I think kind of the assumptions, probably. Like, I assume that things make a certain kind of sense to me, because I've got exam brain, for lack of a better word, right? As a lecturer, and also as kind of a like a nerdy bookie student, right? I'm like, oh, there are these exam questions, and then they get made harder by putting this in or putting that in, and that there's a certain way of learning things. And when I'm teaching mature age students, I think it's been really interesting just sort of thinking about, there are some things that I assume everybody knows that not everybody actually knows. I'll give. I was about to say a simple example, but it's not a simple example, which is that in chemistry we have to use logarithms to measure something called pH, which is basically how acidic or how non-acidic a substance is. And when I was teaching the class through the first time, I was like, "Yep, you take the logarithm of the concentration, and that's the number, that's a pH, and that's it. We're done, right?" And as someone who kind of assumed that people who were in my class understood that, I can see now that, with my students, they, like, my mature age students might have taken a little while to get around. Oh, suddenly there's math. I thought it was a chemistry class, right? And it takes a little while to sort of get that back out of memory. But I've just loved the challenge of that, because that got me thinking. And when I try and teach a class again this year, I'm actually going to bring in like an actual dilution experiment. Like, I'm actually going to bring some very safe food acids into the lecture theater, and I'm actually going to dilute one by 10 times and say, look, when you dilute something 10 times, the logarithm goes down one, and you dilute it 10 times again, the logarithm goes down one. And that's the kind of thing that, that because my students help me step outside my assumptions, that I can just add that little something into it. Because I can guarantee you there's probably a lot of first years in my class who didn't quite get that either, or who thought they knew it
Mm.
and then didn't realize it in the exams. So, yeah.
I love that you're introducing that practical element, like you say, showing
Mm,
them, you're thinking about doing that early on. And it's funny because, I mean, what you've just said was me as a student, because, many mature students, and I mean, I use the term mature, but I think if you're over 22, you're considered mature.
I
Um,
don't feel mature, but
this is what I'm saying,
that's
right?
just me.
I'm 42 and I'm still not
Mm,
mature. But this is what that we're called, right? So,
mm,
but many of us don't have very traditional qualifications. So, for example, in the UK, there's A levels,
mm,
and I didn't have A levels. I did an access course, which was like a year long, covering various subjects just to help you get into university,
mm,
none of which was maths. So when I started doing science, and obviously there were chemistry modules in the first year for biomedical science,
mm,
it was really tough. It was so
mm,
hard to get that maths brain going again, even for the simplest stuff. So
mm.
what you've just described for me would have been hugely helpful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just love I think kind of, if there's one thing that I really love doing, and it probably carries over more from my physics background, but I just love helping my students to be less afraid of math. I As much as possible, I do try and work through the steps with them. Like, one of the things I love doing in my class is to just have a piece of paper out on a visualizer or a projector, and actually just write down the workings that I'm expecting them to write down, because I'm going to force myself to go, well, not quite as slow as that maybe, but to actually go at the speed of writing, right? Rather than at the speed of, oh, click through the slides, we're done here, right? Yeah, and just I think in general, I mean, this is kind of my wish for society, I guess. Like if we were all a little bit less afraid of math and sort of understanding that at the end of the day we have these relationships between things that we measure, and you might measure some things in your life and not other things in your life, and that's okay, and we'll all come to math in that way. And yeah.
Interesting question, I guess. But do you use much ed tech type stuff? Do you like to enhance that learning?
I maybe it's just my background, because when I was doing my undergraduate physics degree, I got lots of teaching. You'd call it chalk and talk, I guess, but we had lots of whiteboard markers, but it's the same idea, right? Like
Hmm.
someone writes an equation down on the board and then they explain what it means, and then you write along with them. And I've always been very partial to that sort of thing. I will say that this year, I am planning to bring AI into my class in a big way, in the sense that if they've when I bring the chemistry questions along that I expect them to answer, I will actually be trying out, ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever different AI
Mm.
systems that we've got, because I'm very curious as well. Like, do these AI systems actually know chemistry, right? And I do want to start that conversation with my students about whether or not an AI can actually do chemistry. In which case, what am I doing, right? Like, what's my job as a first year chemistry lecturer? But besides that, I think I'm a bit of an old soul when it comes to educational technology. Other than that, like I love being able to draw something and project on a projector, and have the students sort of watch that. And yeah, I'm part of it probably is that I don't quite have the time or energy to do really nice animations. I suppose if AI can help me make nice animations, that's probably fine. But
But you like the doing.
yeah, I like the doing, and I also like the students to feel like what all of the learning is actually happening inside their heads. That's kind of where I'm coming from, I guess. Like, I don't want the students to feel like they're watching a fancy animation, right? I want them
Mm.
to feel like there are concepts in their head, which may have their own shapes or their own relationships, and it's going to click together in a certain way for them, hopefully so that they'll get the correct answer in the exam. But it's got to happen inside them rather than on a screen. So that's kind of my philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so interested in you bringing in AI, and I feel like we could have a whole other podcast episode about this once you do it.
Hmm.
Because I just find this whole area so fascinating at the moment. Because initially, so many universities tried to stop it, and then there were universities just bringing in specific rules about how students could use it, I
Hmm.
believe. But yeah, we're let's not go off on a tangent about AI because we'll be here for hours, right?
Oh gosh, we wouldn't stop. We wouldn't stop. Yeah. And then we'll have to tell the AI to summarize our conversation for us.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah.
So when you think about this kind of having this diversity of students, from different backgrounds and different ages, how do you think that enhances the learning environment?
I think, firstly, it's just better for everyone on a human level. Like, it's just so nice to meet different kinds of people. That's one thing, right? And I think it does force me to be very clear about how I'm teaching, because, like we've been talking about, some of these mature age students, thankfully, are very vocal about when I'm skipping over steps that they don't really understand. And I think also what I've really learned, and appreciated, is that in addition to being very clear when they don't understand something, I think mature age students also have, some of them at least, do have the confidence to say that they don't understand what the practical use of something is. And I just love that, right? Because I think, especially after you've been brainwashed through the school system for a while, you're kind of like, oh, this is going to be on the final, so I'm going to learn how to do thing. you know.
Yeah.
But I think the mature age students, I really love that they'll come to me and they say, look, but this doesn't happen in real life or whatever it is, and then I've got to think of why I actually was teaching that, which, of course, some of the time I'll have done that before the class, and some of the time of that, yeah, that's a good point. There's this other thing that happens, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, isn't it? And it's so easy to forget those things because those are the things that really excite people when they can see how it fits into the real world. Particularly with subjects like chemistry and physics, for example, because it can be quite difficult sometimes to see how it fits into real life. But of course, it all does.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely fits into real life. I mean, my personal conspiracy theory is that everyone does kind of know on some level how physics and chemistry works because we live in the world of physics and chemistry, right?
Mm.
Every day, you're using forces, you're using chemicals, and thankfully, after you know decades and centuries of discovering things, we kind of know which chemicals will kill you and which ones won't and what all the different chemicals do. So, just in your everyday life, you're already encountering physics and chemistry in lots of different places. And I firmly believe that, I think people would just have a lot of fun, honestly, and also, a lot of learning if they just when they look at what they already know sort of implicitly and I think part of my job as a lecturer is to bring some of that out and say, hey, you already use some of this stuff in your everyday living. Like one of my favorites is baking. Like baking, there's a lot of chemistry in baking. If you're
Yeah.
either a good baker or a bad baker, you know chemistry one way or another, and that's so fun. Like acidity and eggs and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's baking is a great analogy, isn't it, for chemistry? Like we've all had bakes that have gone horribly wrong because we've forgotten something like baking powder, for example, and then it hasn't risen. So I think that's such an easy analogy for everybody to relate to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's very relatable, but you also learn a lot because and again, thanks to regulation, right? All of the chemicals that go into your food is actually listed on the back, and sometimes I guess one of the class exercises I might do is just like I talk a lot about acids because that was one of the first year modules that I was teaching. But just looking at the ingredient list on the back of baking powder and saying, oh, hey, this is the acid and this is the bit that gives you the gas, and this is the bit that sort of keeps it from turning into a big solid lump because Brisbane's very humid and yeah, yeah. No, just helping to get people less scared of the chemicals that they're encountering. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's half the challenge, isn't it, with subjects like that? Um, People just immediately think, oh, chemistry is so hard. It's so, and that almost puts a block on their ability to learn sometimes because you've convinced yourself, oh, no, it's too hard for me. I did that with physics, actually.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things I really try. I hope, I think I do get my students to successfully feel like they can learn some chemistry. It sounds like such a basic thing, but I absolutely want everyone to walk out of my class thinking, yeah, I could do that. Maybe I can't do as much of that as Shern, but I sure could do a lot of it. And
Yeah.
yeah, and just have the sense of themselves as a person who can learn new things and enjoys learning new things. And I think that's just so rare and precious. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you on everything there. So, I guess my last question to you is what would you say to people that think to themselves, oh, I'd love to do chemistry. I'd love to do a subject like this, but I'm too old. I've been out of school for too long. I won't be able to cope. What's your advice?
Wow. I guess find a local college, university, find a course to audit. These days, thanks to the internet, right? There's just so much information available online. I mean, I can look up some links and drop them into the podcast notes. But there are just these wonderful YouTube series of on on just about every science really, but chemistry in particular. One of my favorites that I really enjoyed showing my second year students was a clip from, I think it was the Royal Society of Chemistry in England, and as a they burnt, and they actually got a lab grown diamond and like got it to burn under an atmosphere of pure oxygen. I mean, just for a joke, they pretended that it was
Wow.
someone's engagement ring diamond, which obviously it wasn't. But so things like that are just so available. And then yeah, I guess look, this next one is a little bit tricky, but it's always nice when you can find a way to apply these things in your everyday life, or to experiment with them in your everyday life. And of course, we thanks to regulation, we probably can't get much of the really dangerous stuff. And obviously, don't drink anything you're not supposed to drink, and don't inhale anything you're not supposed to inhale. But in your local hardware store, there's actually quite a lot of interesting chemistry happening behind the scenes. Like you can get a pH measuring meter in the gardening. I mean, in the gardening department over at my local hardware store, and you can get a pH dye that will actually show you whether something's acidic or basic, and you can just go right ahead and try different things and see, oh, what happens if I mix this and that. And it's always very fun, either to just try things out as a hobby, or look up experiments on the internet. There's lots of different experiments that are geared for children, but really, we can all learn new things, right? and
Mm.
and we can all try different things from time to time. And if you've got children in our lives, then it's a really wonderful way to occupy them as well, right? Pick up a bit of chemistry so that you and your kids can have something to do on a rainy day that isn't involving a screen, right? That's something that you could do. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, because actually you've just reminded me of the old DNA extraction one that you can
Oh
do at
yeah.
home. That's a great one to learn about the chemistry of DNA extraction, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, that's such great advice. And I love that it's slightly different in that it's like go out there and test these things for yourself. And just to be clear, for safety reasons, we're not talking about mixing bleach and cleaning products. Do not do that.
Oh yes, absolutely.
We're
Yes,
talking,
yes, yes, yes.
maybe lemon juice and bicarbonate of soda or something.
Yeah. Look, a really simple and straightforward thing to keep yourself safe is get a bunch of like disposable syringes or disposable droppers, because with any household chemical, like if you're dealing with it like one drop at a time, you're not gonna get into too much danger, right? If you see anything crazy going on, just stop. Right, that's
Yeah,
much easier to do. So don't mix anything in cups or whatever. Right, start with little
start
tweezers
small.
or syringes if you're scared. You can actually drop things onto like a cotton Q-tip, and then, well, yeah, or like a cotton bud, and they'll react in there. So that's again a very very safe way to do things, and you're not actually even having to mop up any liquids when you're done. So yeah.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, that's brilliant
Yeah.
advice. Honestly, Shen, I just want to say thank you for coming on here. It's been an absolute joy listening to you and hearing all about you. And I definitely want to speak to you again once you've started implementing AI. We need to have a conversation.
No, thank you for having me on. I mean, we all learn when we teach, and we learn when we talk. So, thanks for giving me the opportunity, and just, gosh, how a chance for me to sit and sift through my own thoughts as well. So yeah, thank you for that.
I guess people will be wondering before we end, where can they connect with you if they want to?
The easiest thing is probably on LinkedIn. That's where I am quite often. That's how you found me. So yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that
that's
is.
that's the easiest
Yeah.
way, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I will add a link to your LinkedIn if that's okay, and then if
Yes,
anyone
of
wants to
course. Yep.
connect with you, they can do that. But thanks again, Shen. It's honestly been a pleasure, and thank to everyone for listening. We'll see you again next week.